the Evolution Security Podcast. Welcome to the Evolution Security Podcast, where we give you the knowledge and live training to protect yourself, your family, and your country. Our hosts are Eric Davis, Aaron Davis, and myself, Brian Schilt. This show is brought to you in part by Tenacor. Tenacor manufactures holsters and weapon retention systems that work. We suggest that you check out the Velo 4 AWIB holster. We don't only recommend it, we also use them daily. Find them at tenacor.com. That's TENICOR. Use EVOSEC at checkout for 10% off. That's EVOSEC at checkout for 10% off. Also, if you'd like to find us online, look for us on Instagram at EVOSECUSA, Facebook at EVOSECUSA, and our website, evosec.org. That's evosec.org. And now also on Patreon at EVOSECUSA. That's patreon.com/EVOSECUSA. We would love to see donations and are working on benefits for benefactors.
The problem is that when you are setting up your own training program, you are preparing for an event where your life or the life of a loved one may be literally at stake. Plus, after the event, your life, freedom, and livelihood are still at risk if your training was inappropriate. Tom Givens. That was from Chapter 7, Finding Relevant Training, from Massad Ayoob's book, Straight Talk on Armed Defense. Part of our mission in EVOSEC is to help our audience find filtered and relevant training. We believe some of the best sources of training are the guests that we have on this show, which is a huge reason why we have them on our show, because we believe in them. I also figured that this was a timely quote, since tonight we have a special guest that is an instructor under Tom. I'd like to also pause for just a second. If you're getting something out of our show, please swipe down and leave a rating and review. It helps us grow our audience and gets the word out. Please subscribe and share on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcast, Player FM, Spotify, and more. We believe that our show will help people in their path in self-protection, not the least of which is from our knowledge and experience, but more importantly is the knowledge of our guests, whom are our instructors and our mentors. This evening we have a very special guest, Dr. Sherman House of the Civilian Defender. Sherman is in his second decade as a medical health care provider. He is a dentist and a reserve police officer just outside of Nashville, Tennessee. Dr. House is the originator of the Civilian Defender training concept. He has personally saved lives using his extensive emergency medical knowledge. He has also studied extensively in the defensive arts, self-defense law, emergency medicine, criminal psychology, tactical driving, and other survival skills. He is also an accomplished firearms instructor with certificates from Tom and Lynn Givens as a Rangemaster-Certified pistol and shotgun instructor. He was also a resident instructor under James Yeager of Tactical Response. Other very prominent instructors Sherman has trained with is Paul Gomez, Gabe White, John Farnam as a DTI instructor, Greg Sullivan, Rob Edwards, John Chapman, Dr. William Aprill of Aprill Risk Consulting, Massad Ayoob, Larry Vickers, Lee Weems, Dave Spaulding, and Andrew Branca of the Law of Self-Defense, just to name a few. Without further ado, let's get to the interview.
Hey everyone, welcome to the show this week. We've got an awesome guest we're going to be chatting with here. We've got Dr. Sherman House of Civilian Defender, which you can find at civiliandefender.com. And how you doing tonight, Sherman?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Oh man, we appreciate you showing up. So, of course, here with Eric and Aaron, how you guys doing?
I'm doing great.
Nice to be on here with you guys.
Oh yeah, always a good time. Well, Sherman, just, we follow you and we watch what you're doing all the time, but for our audience members who may not know you, why don't you give us just a little bit of a short bio and background of like where you came from, maybe where you grew up and how you got to where you are now.
Okay. I'm originally from Western Washington State. My dad is a naval aviator. I was born at NAS Whidbey Island. And I moved to Tennessee about 15 years ago. And prior to moving to Tennessee, I was worked in public safety and in the armored truck business. So I was a firefighter, EMT. I started as a police cadet and then kind of went over to the fire and EMS side of the house for a while. And then, went to community college for a few years and worked my way through university at Gonzaga in Eastern Washington. And then went to the Meharry Medical College here in Nashville, Tennessee, and completed my residency in hospital dentistry at the Metro Hospital here in Nashville as well. And then also studied forensic odontology at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. Most people know it as the Body Farm. And then I'm also a reserve police officer here in Tennessee as well, when I'm not doing dentistry or teaching. That's kind of there's more to it than that, but that's the gist of it. Oh, I have degrees in law enforcement, cell biology, philosophy, and of course a doctorate of dental surgery, and then several certificates after that. Oh, and then as far as training, as far as firearms training goes, I've trained with I have instructor certifications from John Farnam at DTI, from James Yeager at Tactical Response, from Tom Givens at Rangemaster in both rifle and shotgun. I've trained with just about everybody that there is to train. Massad Ayoob, Gabe White. I have a dark pin and a light pin. Gabe Spaulding. There's a whole list of all of them on my the ShivWorks guys, of course, on my website that has them all. But it's late at night here, and I'm sure I could get all of them if I really, really thought about it off the top of my head chronologically, but there's quite a few of them.
Sherman, that's quite all right. We're going to hit on some of those, and in all honesty, that's part of the reason we're having you on here, because your extensive background. And I have to circle back to your mention of tactical response, because that's the first time that I met you. A good friend of mine and I were attending the fighting rifle course, and you were one of the primary instructors. And I have to admit that, I learned a ton in that class and stuff that I still use today. And I had a blast training under you at that class, and I really appreciate you for that experience.
Yeah, man, glad to do it. That was a good time. James Yeager is one of those people in the business that everybody kind of like loves to hate, but I'll love that guy until the day I die. He's been nothing but good to me, and I really enjoyed my time when I worked there, and I think it was I still think to this day, I still think his curriculum is very sound and one of the best out there. So.
Well, I'll double down on what you just said. There are a lot of haters for James. Most typically, haters are because folks are successful, and James' model is very successful. And I'll add to this for audience members that may not know about James Yeager. Seek him out. He and his cadre, you're going to learn a lot. Not only that, there's a wide range of classes that you can take. At some point, we're going to invite James on the show. And I'll add this too, the team room. I think the first 12 people that sign up for a tactical response course get to stay in James's house downstairs in a bunk type setting. There's a huge living area that everybody gets to hang out. And speaking of hanging out, that was a real unique experience for me as well, because I had known the late Paul Gomez for many years, conversed with him on email and, of course, on Total Protection Interactive, the TPI forum where a lot of us met. So I had some excellent conversations with Paul. And if anybody knew Paul, he was a conversationalist. He was a contrarian, but he was also a deep thinker as it relates to the business. And I believe that he was a big driver, if any, in the background and also up front in the training community. What's your thoughts on Paul's contribution?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, Paul was one of the first guys to really do, I guess what I would call in philosophical terms, like a radical reductionist type of philosophy when it comes to multidisciplinary training. So, Paul would take very small pieces from various parts of curriculum, whether it was medical or combatives or grappling or edge weapons, and take a very, very small piece of that puzzle and like dissect it down to its most minute detail and, research it as far as its history and implementation and who did it first and how long it's been around and what they did it with, and was able to shore up a lot of his own curriculum with those little small fundamental, building pieces and kind of change it into something that now we sort of almost take for granted. He was, like you said, he was a great conversationalist, had so many interests outside of the martial arts and defensive pistol craft, that, he was just a hoot of a guy to hang out with, and never had a dull moment with that guy.
Well, and also the firearms community is partially at a debt to, not partially, greatly at a debt to Paul, in that Craig Douglas credits Paul with convincing him that he needed to start teaching. So those in the audience that have trained with Craig, we talk about ECQC all the time. We're all alum of that course, if not multi-alum. And we have Paul to thank for that, right?
Yep, that's correct. He, at the time, I think Craig was doing, small classes like when asked and things like that. And, maybe doing a few training groups that, Paul roped him into. But, I think it was, probably early, I can't remember if it was the late 90s or the early 2000s when they started it. But, at the time, Paul was working for Andy Stanford, through ops. And that was kind of and Yeager was too, in fact. That's how it all kind of turned into a separate multi-headed machine at that point.
Excellent. Well, that's a great set of insight on that, Sherman. Some of that I was not tracking. So, Brian, I think you got a question for Sherman?
Hey, Sherman, Brian again. Your civilian defender program is a very concise roadmap to what most important in a self-defense lifestyle, what we like to call the self-defense package, Can you tell us a bit about the civilian defender and what led you to create it?
Sure. So when I first started my website or blog site, I guess, I don't really think of it as a blog site because I don't publish stuff on it regularly. I just, I kind of think of it as like an essay site because I only post stuff there if I have something really useful to say. As I get older and get more experience, I have less things to say. But I had my website was originally called Revolver Science, and I talked about all kinds of stuff, but I talked a lot about revolvers. And my friend, Dr. William Aprill, was like, man, this whole revolver science thing kind of limits you as far as like what you can talk about, and rope people's interest in, because, a lot of times people would go, where do I find out more about what you're doing? And I'd say, it's, my website's revolverscience.com. They're like, I'm a Glock guy. I don't carry a revolver. Like, I don't have anything to do with, antique gun. I'd be like, oh, okay, well. So it was like I was losing readership because of it. And so around that same time, I wrote an essay called Becoming the Civilian Defender. And I came up with it for a couple of reasons. Reason one is that, as you guys know, to people that are in your circles, you are their go-to expert for anything, firearms, martial arts, combatives, awareness related. So, if they have a question about, this or that, you're the guy that, or gal that they go to. So, when people would ask me that, after a while, you kind of give the same answers over and over again. And it got to the point where I thought, boy, this really needs to be codified and kind of written down so that maybe people can get an idea of how big the picture actually is. And it's not just, getting a pistol and, a box of ammunition and getting a carry permit. And, now you're ready for the mean streets of, San Francisco or wherever you are. So I wrote that article and, came up with a list of 8 different things or 8 different areas of study that I thought kind of, culminated in what I called like the curriculum for, an astute student of personal protection and self-defense. And those 8 things, just to review in case people haven't ever read the article is called Becoming the Civilian Defender. If you just type that into Google, it'll automatically take you there. But the first area was what I called criminology, street smarts, and physical preparedness. And what that referred to is kind of the stuff that Dr. William Aprill teaches about, like the 5 W's of risk and who violent criminal actors are, and, who these people that are serial victimizers, that as armed citizens, were most likely to run into, and get a good deal of resistance or a fight from. Like people that are kind of uninitiated think that, the tweaker, the guy who's stealing copper, or, stealing stuff out of unlocked cars, is going to be an in-your-face, with a knife or a machete kind of guy, when that's not really the case. Those people are criminals of opportunity, and they're just looking for, your resources to be able to get their next fix or purchase or whatever that might be. So the people that we're worried about are, a higher grade of dirtbag. And William Aprill has a really great curriculum on that. I think that that's one of those things that the reason I put that as one of the first steps is because a lot of people have never heard that sort of stuff before. And when they hear it, it opens their eyes to a world that they previously didn't know existed, unless you are a cop or prosecutor or somebody that deals with those types of criminals on a regular basis. You're not going to have any idea that those people even exist. So I thought that was a good thing. The other thing is what I call street smarts, or just survival skills related to what Claude Werner, the tactical professor, calls the area of study of proxemics, where you're concerning yourself with the different areas of space, of your personal space and the areas that are directly around you. And, along with that, it's incumbent upon, people who are skilled in personal protection to know who's around them and what they're doing, as Tom Givens says. So when you know these kinds of things, you are aware of your surroundings and what's happening. And that's a major important thing. And then the other thing that I kind of combined into that one area was called physical preparedness. And it just, I wrote an article a few years back about the best firearms accessory that you could buy as a gym membership. And the reason being is that, we've all seen the folks at classes or in gun ranges or at gun shops, that would, darn near have a heart attack if they had to bend over to pick up brass or an empty magazine, and if you're in that type of condition, well, you're going to need to make some changes if you're being realistic with yourself in terms of what you're doing to protect yourself. So that was the first thing. And then the next ones are all pretty self-explanatory, and I won't drone on as long as I did with the first one, but that one required some explanation. But the other areas are defensive driving, emergency medical skills, legal knowledge, less lethal skills, handgun carry and tactics course. Handgun carry course, handgun skills and tactics course, and then defensive tactics. So 8 things total. And I put them all in that specific order because, I kind of felt that those were the areas that most needed, attention. So are we more likely to need the capability to run up 3 or 4 flights of stairs without passing out or having a heart attack? Or are we more likely to need blue belt level skills in jiu-jitsu to be able to, grapple with somebody in a parking lot? Well, probably running up the flights of stairs is more useful for not only, physical protection, but just preparedness for everyday life. And then after that, of course, defensive driving and emergency medicine. Defensive driving, I think that is something that really gets short shrift by a lot of people because we spend so many hours of our day in and around cars. And, there's a lot of classes and stuff that are vehicle specific, like vehicle defense and shooting around vehicles and all this kind of stuff. But, having done armored transport type stuff for a living before, I can say that I would much rather just, stomp on the gas and drive out of a place in an armored truck than dismount the armored truck or open the gun ports and do some trick shooting out of them. So, it's not as cool. It's not as fun. It's a lot less gear centric, but, driving classes, I think, and defensive driving knowledge are super important. And then, of course, emergency medicine. I think that, of the classes that I've taught before and the organizations that I've worked for, teaching, there's been a whole heck of a lot more people that have actually used medical skills to save lives before than people that have actually used shooting skills, even though there are people that have done both. But the frequency of needing emergency medical skills is far more acute, much more commonplace than having to use shooting skills. So that's why I ranked them in that order, and there's, any number of people that we know, that have had like carbine courses and handgun courses, and they haven't taken any legal stuff. They haven't taken, and they don't carry any less lethal stuff. They don't know any combatives or hand-to-hand or martial arts. They don't know any driving stuff. You see, so, I thought all this kind of built as a stepwise process so that people could kind of look at this and go, man, do I need to take like another carbine class, with my home defense AR, or would I be better off to spend, $400 to get some legal knowledge, or even less money than that to get some medical knowledge, things like that. So that was kind of the impetus behind that.
Well,
so for people
Sherman,
starting out, and for people that were already in the business, or already not in the business, but already in the training pipeline to kind of figure out what do I do next.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate you putting the impetus on those other items, because one of the things Craig talks about is, all this training that we do for hand-to-hand and firearm being a seatbelt. There's a lot of things that went wrong if you get to the point where you need to use your firearm. And all down that road, one of them may have been, you may have been able to evade in a driving method. You may have been able to, save someone else in a medical situation, all of those. So yeah, we run into a lot of that where people they want to be the trick shot and be able to draw fast and get that first shot off on center target and all. That's an awesome skill to train and learn. That it is really important, like you point out, that those other skills are so much more likely to get used.
Yeah. I mean, and people forget there's a context to this stuff. In the general training community, there's civilian-centric trainers, and then there's both military and law enforcement. And a lot of those guys and gals teach open enrollment classes. So anybody can take any of that stuff if they're an open enrollment class. But a lot of times people think just because they take it means that it's applicable to their life. And that's not necessarily the case, I use an AR-15 type rifle when I'm on duty at the police department, and I train with that thing every year. But really the applications for me to use that rifle outside of when I'm working in a law enforcement capacity are really, really, really slim. I'm far more likely to use a handgun in my everyday life up to and including, in a home defense situation, just because of, the way that my life is configured currently. So I think a lot of times people sort of lose the focus and get lost in, the forest for the trees kind of thing, because, you go take one of these classes and you go, okay, for home defense, I need a plate carrier and 6 magazines and a knife and, all this kind of stuff, when really you would be better off to maybe work on like fortifying your home, or, getting some other things that are, far more likely for you to need, like emergency medical skills, things like that.
Well, I'd like to interject here a little bit. This is Aaron Sherman. Mm-hmm. Along those lines, Eric and I took a class from a superstar, carbine and pistol guy. Mm-hmm. I won't name his name. He's a great guy, but it was the same thing. It was all military based and mm-hmm. a lot of fun. There's nothing wrong mm-hmm. with taking those classes, but like Tom Givens says, that you should really look at that as a vacation and fun rather than training. And also, I used to go to, every Sunday, there was a local FBI SWAT team member that would run a training group. at our range here. And again, super cool guy, lots of fun, but it was all just rolling around in the dirt with ARs and plate carriers and sitting in cars. The time that I said, okay, this is a waste of my time, was when they put like a pound of tannerite underneath a vehicle and shot it off, and that was my signal to jump out of the car and start shooting the static targets around the car. It's like, dude,
Oh, wow.
yeah, and I mean, luckily no one got hurt, because I mean that was a decent explosion. I shouldn't have even been there, but I mean, again,
Right.
great guys, but waste of time for training, just entertainment. But
Yeah. And I think that, not to say that like all the guys that teach military classes or all the guys that teach law enforcement classes, like, that stuff doesn't have any educational value. It certainly does. But, a lot of times I think that, people get crazy ideas. And if you're in it just because you want to have like if you're an IT guy and you want to blow off steam on the weekends and, go do, 2,000 round carbine class or something, man, like have at it. But, don't, fool yourself into a false sense of security thinking that like that's going to, make you a commando or make you, some type of mystic rifleman when it's not. It's you got to really understand like what you're kind of drilling down on and looking for and what's going to be applicable to your life. I think that's where a lot of people sort of go off the rails. And I mean, I've taken classes like that several times, and I enjoy them. And I think that they're a blast, but at the same time, I make sure that I have all of the essential stuff shored up as well. And, one of the funnest classes I ever took that was taught by a military guy was a Larry Vickers AK operator class, a 2-day class. And Chris Barrett and I drove from Tennessee to North Carolina to take it together, and just had a heck of a good time, and it was fun. And Larry's like full of trivia when it comes to like all kinds of stuff, but so much on AKs. I learned a ton, and learned some great accuracy tricks and handling skills. But as far as like increasing my IQ as a man at arms, did it do that? Absolutely. Have I ever used an AK operationally, like for anything other than fun? No. Mm-hmm. If I showed up with an AK at the police department, half the people there wouldn't know the difference between an AK and an AR. One quarter of them would think like, why does he have an AK instead of his normal AR? And then the other 25% would probably, just want to shoot it. But it's one of those things that like, I valued the experience. But as far as like how that relates to my actual life, instead of me just being a gun nerd and a guy who loves trivia, I'm not going to go overseas to places where AKs are commonplace enough that I'm never going to have to worry about picking one up. And somebody else out there is going to say, yeah, but what about in an active shooter situation? You need to know how to, I would say like in an active shooter situation, if there's an AK laying around and you know how to make it safe, you're probably better than 90% of the population.
Yeah. Along this subject, there's a Frank Proctor class that is in Texas at the end of the year. I'll tell you, just for entertainment and fun, I want to go, and I'm trying to talk Eric and Brian to come down for it. But again, that's going to be for fun. I'm sure we're going to learn some things, but more than anything, it's just going to be for fun because Frank Proctor's a cool guy, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of fun hanging out with him. Yeah. So moving on to something else here, Sherman. We definitely would like to host you, Evolution Security. We'd like to host you at the first opportunity. And of course, we're really interested in hosting you for your hemorrhage arrest course. Now, could you hit on the details and what's covered in that class?
Sure. So this class has kind of been an evolution of something that I've taught over about the past 14 years. And when I worked for James Yeager, I had taught, I was the medical program director for him, and I taught a class called Immediate Action Medical that was a 2-day class that covered all kinds of stuff. And when I first started, after I started practicing dentistry full time and didn't work at Tactical Response anymore, people were still asking me to teach medical classes. And the thing is that, while, training junkies like us don't think anything about taking a 16-hour class over a weekend, for lay people or for people that aren't outside the training community, a 16-hour commitment is, especially on a Saturday and a Sunday, is really tough, So I needed to come up with a training curriculum that was rigorous enough to be effective, but short enough to be attractive to people, that aren't training nerds. So I came up with a 4-hour and an 8-hour variant. And what I did was the class is vocationally generic. So you don't have to be, a patrolman or a SWAT cop or a military infantryman or any kind of action hero to get benefit from the class. The class was designed in such a way that, I've taught it to church groups, church security groups, choirs. I've taught it to, preschool teachers, all kinds of people in education, people from all different walks of life, thousands of people at this point. And I've made it in such a way that it is, I make the information as accessible to everybody as possible. TCCC is awesome. And if you're a training nerd and you have the resources and the time to be able to do a course like that, or a course that's based on that, I think that's awesome. And I think it's a good thing. And I think that you should do it. But if you don't have the inclination to do something like that and you just want, high yield material, that's what I try and provide. And I, with a lot of the military type based training, there's a ton of acronyms in it because the military and law enforcement, loves acronyms. And I take away all that and make it as not dumbed down. It's not like it's a watered down class, but I make it as streamlined as possible so that you can do the most that you can with the limited materials and gear that you have available to you in the quickest amount of time.
So, but I guess,
ahead,
is there just in general that you would like to talk about? I mean, maybe the components that are covered, at least.
Sure. So the first thing we cover is what I call, it's basically the one acronym or mnemonic in the class. It's the only one. And I call it the 5 Bs. And it's an evolution of an idea that I got from a guy named Dr. Keith Brown years back. And it's the 5 Bs, like B as in boy. So it's bad guys, bleeding, breathing, brains, and body. And in that very specific order. So we go through each step of those and talk about the significance and what each of those letters signifies. And what we would do interventionally to our environment and to our patient at each stop along the way. So that's kind of the foundation of the class. And then once that's established, we get physical skills, involved with manipulating tourniquets and wound packing and chest seals. And then we go to in addition to self-rescue skills, buddy rescue skills, and then also, scenario-based training. And then in the 8-hour class, we do more scenario-based training in like an experiential learning lab type thing, to steal a Craig Douglas term. And then we also go over improvised medical stuff, which is a whole separate block that I teach a 4-hour class on when I teach for Tom Givens at like TACCon, which is basically a course that just deals with if you run out of, if you've used your tourniquet or if you've used your chest seal or if you've used your wound packing, what other kind of things can you get from your common everyday environment that you can use as stopgap measures that aren't as effective? I mean, I'm not saying it's as good as, purpose-built materials, but if it's purpose-built materials or nothing, I would rather have something that I can improvise. So I call that specific class, the one I do at TACCon, the Angus MacGyver School of Medicine. So that's covered in the 8-hour class as well.
So Sherman, that sounds awesome. And we most assuredly have been wanting to bring medical into Evo 6, not our curriculum specifically, because we're not experts in that, but we team with people as we progress through this new venture, and we would love to have you as our help in that, of course, under your auspices. So one of the most interesting courses that on your website that I kind of envision maybe doing 2 days, maybe doing the 8-hour hemorrhaging arrest class and the disaster dentistry course. And so that really piqued my interest. Obviously, you being a dentist, this is probably near and dear to your heart. And I'll tell you a side story. So prior to me getting ready for my current adventure, I had to have a lot of dental work done. And I could not help but think of you when I was sitting there getting all that work done, because I've been fortunate. I've had, really good teeth up until recently. So I've had some cavities come in, and I had to have quite a few cavities filled anyway. That being said, I could not help. It's like, man, Sherman probably want to whoop my ass for being in this chair waiting this long to get this done. So on that note, that's probably not a typical course in our community. Am I wrong?
No, I think that there's maybe one other dentist out there that teaches a class like that I know of. And I think he primarily teaches it to like the prepping community, which is a whole other kind of thing. I've taught that class maybe like 6 times over the past 15 years, just because, it's not, it's more of an informational kind of thing. And, it's kind of funny because people want to take a 4-hour class, but they want me to teach them, how to be a ditch dentist in 4 hours and, condense down, 10 years of collegiate education and a decade's worth of experience, into a 4-hour class. And there is no there's no 4-hour brain surgery class. There's no 4-hour cardiothoracic surgery class. It's just, there's such a huge body of information there that the stuff that we cover is basically like, first of all, like, don't get yourself in this problem. So, prevention is kind of the big take home for that class. But the other thing is if you do find yourself in a situation where you've got something that's falling apart and you need to kind of like limp it along until you can get to a higher level of care, here's a few things that you can do to do that.
Well, hey,
and usually the way I do it
is
like you're talking about for people that host me, we would do like the 8-hour hemorrhage arrest course, like on a Saturday, say, and then on the Sunday, we would do 2 4-hour blocks, one of disaster dentistry, and then the other one of disaster wound closure, where you learn how to suture, and super glue wounds and things like that. So, that's usually how those pairings go together.
Hey, Brian here again, Sherman. It's a neat thing that you actually cover that, because and not to trip too far down this the prepper path, because it is kind of where you see these things come in. But if you think about it, dental, vision, cardio health in general, people kind of take these things for granted. And, if you have ongoing tooth problems, get them taken care of for sure. If you have a vision problem, you should have 3 or 4 spare sets of glasses. If you know that you have a heart condition that requires medication to keep you alive, you should have at least 30 to 60 days of that set aside, and it just all falls back into that, where we don't get to pick if a natural disaster or anything is going to interrupt our services for 20 days or 30 days or 60 days. And that can really take someone out of being a useful, functioning member of a team, having a massive tooth problem. You cannot function. And I'm glad that you see that. I mean, of course, it's what you did, but also there's a reason for this to be a discussion point. So.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, I see people for acute, dental issues all the time, like trauma, or, somebody's eating a piece of food and the tooth cracks in half, or, somebody, any number of things. I mean, the list goes on and on. One of the things that I see routinely, though, is people that know that they have a dental issue or an abscess tooth, and they don't do anything about it. And it goes months and months and sometimes years before they actually do anything about it. And sometimes it's to the point where, people think that they're just going to be able to come in and I'll numb them up and take it out. But, we're to the point where we need to hospitalize that person and give them IV antibiotics. And, a lot of times people just don't, and I can't for the life of me understand why that people don't get that an infection inside of your head less than 3 inches from your brain or 6 inches from your heart isn't a life-threatening thing. It's a life-threatening thing. It can kill you, really, really easily, especially if you have any other kind of medical issues that cause you to be constitutionally challenged in any way. Obesity, diabetes, any type of autoimmune disorder whatsoever. Any of those things, plus an abscess tooth, that is spread, into what we call a fascial space, which is, the compartments that our bodies are made out of that, lead into our heart or up into our brain. If you get extension of that infection into one of those spaces, there's a really good chance you're going to die. So, it's not something to fiddle around with. And as you can imagine, people die around the world and even in the United States from these things due to lack of, access to care, usually because of poverty, of course, but, in areas where there's war or disaster or, crazy weather events and things like that. This stuff kills people all the time. And we just kind of don't really pay much attention to it because we think that antibiotics will fix anything. And that's not always the case.
Well, hey, Sherman, this is Aaron again.
Yeah.
I just want to digress a little bit. I know that you wouldn't want to necessarily put it in these minimalist terms, but I'm just curious. Mm-hmm. If a guy's got a decent sized pocket in his pants, what 3 items from a emergency medical standpoint would you recommend that they have?
I think that if you could have 3 things, I would say carry a tourniquet, either, like a soft T wide type tourniquet or a cat tourniquet, I think are the two best ones out there. There's a lot of other ones that are, on the TCCC list now that are approved, but I think that you can't go wrong with those two choices. That's thing one. Thing two would be some type of hemostatic agent, whether that's quick clot, combat gauze, something like that, would be thing number two. And thing number three would be purpose-built chest seals that are, made to occlude, wounds, basically to the upper thorax area. And those three things, I think if you have purpose-built items like that, those are three things that you can improvise if you have to, but boy, the purpose-built ones sure work a lot better, both realistically and, like in studies, in published journal studies, not just anecdotally.
Sure. Thanks for that info, because, realistically, some people have these huge pocket dumps, and, I've got a fairly big one myself, but I still need to keep it sparse.
Yeah.
And already I have a specific, I think I talked about it on another show, but I have a specific pair of pants. And one of the main reasons why I have them is I have a decent enough single pocket on the left side that I carry my tourniquet and some hemostatic gauze. Mm-hmm. Now I need to, I've been thinking I need to add a chest seal there. And I know that there are more important items that you really should have, but those are pretty practical too.
Yeah, I mean, like you can get a pair of high fin. It's spelled H as in Henry, Y as in Young fin, like a shark fin. Chest seals. You get a pair of them off of Amazon. They're not much bigger than like a playing card. They make them in different sizes, and they come in a pair. So you have an entry and an exit wound seal. And I mean, you could carry that unobtrusively in your back pocket, and it's, it's a few pieces of plastic and some foil. You could carry that in your back pocket and or tucked into the front of your shirt pocket or any other places you can stick it. And I think that would really, really go a long way. And a lot of the combat guys and stuff now is vacuum sealed too. So the containers that it comes in are minuscule. Like it's not hard to carry the few things that are really hard to improvise very unobtrusively. And yeah, I agree. I see some of these pocket dumps and stuff on Instagram, and I just think like, who are you kidding, dude? Like I know you're not carrying that stuff. So yeah, that's what I think you should do. That would be the three that I'd pick.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, man.
Well, Sherman, I'm lucky in my job that I can take the TCCC Combat Lifesaver course on a fairly regular basis. My cert is actually up right now, and I'm working with a colleague so that we can get in that class and get that re-upped. So, like I said, I'm kind of lucky in that.
Sure. Yeah, so, I mean, it's a valuable class. And I think it's one of those things that, just like, you would think it was weird if I said, well, hey man, like, as long as you get, maybe 50, 60 rounds in a year, you'd be fine. Like that's good. Like you think, what are you talking about, man? Like if I stake my life on a pistol, 50 to 60 rounds a year isn't adequate annual preparation. That's like a practice session. Well, the same thing goes with medical stuff. It doesn't hurt, and it most certainly helps to have recent training. Studies have shown time after time after time, it's not necessarily, the scale of the training or how many rounds you fired or the skills that you pulled off or whatever. It's the recency of it. And I think that it's important to, to check those boxes every year and make sure that, you're current on your TCCC based skills. You're current on your CPR, your AED, your Heimlich maneuver, your basic first aid kind of stuff. All that stuff is crucial, and you're far more likely to need that than you are to need so many of the other things that have a much cooler facade, and there's more emphasis placed on just because it's flashier and it's neater in a lot of ways.
Roger, and most assuredly, that's another course that I get to take for free is the AED and CPR. So it's time to renew that one as well. I'm glad you brought that up, because we talked about that a few shows ago, about the importance of it. At a minimum, start there. Then you can worry about the hemorrhage arresting type courses. So thanks for bringing that up. So segueing, or let me say it this way, circle back to firearms, because we're going to move the show in a different direction here in just a second with Aaron. So you've trained with, the most prominent instructors in the industry, and I might add that there's a lot of us that kind of, apex into some of the most common prominent instructors. I think that's for a reason. I think it's not because we think we're better than everybody else, or that we think they're better than everybody else. It just seems that those that have been training in this community for years, they start to filter, and they start to seek out the instructors that have what folks really need. So, Tom Givens and Lynn Givens of Rangemaster, James Yeager, as you mentioned earlier, John Farnam, Craig Douglas, John Chapman, Dr. William Aprill, Massad Ayoob. I would like to ask you, if you want to say, you don't have to, and you can name anybody that I didn't mention as well, who would you say was most influential on you? Not just one. I mean, you can name a handful of folks as far as your firearms and your combatives training. Over.
Sure. Well, I would have to give it to two people primarily, and here's why. First of all, I would say I learned most. They say if you want to learn something, really forwards and backwards, teach it. And when I went to work for Tactical Response as their medical program director, but also as a firearms instructor, I was already a solid tactical shooter, and, but the apprenticeship type method of instruction that's much more common, I'd say in martial arts, for jiu-jitsu example, you have coaches that study under professors, and those people are teaching something, and they're proficient at the skills, but they're still under the tutelage and the very watchful eye of the professor, who is correcting them and giving them, course direction as they go on. That's what I got from James Yeager. When I worked for James, I knew what the curriculum was. We would stick to a very enumerated and tight course outline, and there was no freelancing off of that. You follow what I'm saying? But the way that the material is presented, both verbally and in demonstration, fits in a very specific thing, and all of those little life hacks and teaching people things, I learned a whole bunch from Yeager on that, even on stuff that I teach, obviously that's outside the realm of firearms training, just in learning in general. And then as far as firearms utilization, in addition to James, Tom Givens also. The cool thing about Tom Givens is that he has written so many books, and if you've ever read any of his books, when you read them, you hear him in Tom Givens' voice. His text matches his courses exactly. So it's like you take his course, you read his book, and it automatically reviews everything for you that you took in the course, which I find helpful. And that's one of those things where, when I go to a Tom Givens class now, and I've probably taken 15 or 20 classes with Tom Givens over the last, 15 years, that like when Tom asks a question, he's asking a rhetorical question, but he's looking for a specific answer. Like, I unconsciously know the answer because I've read his books. I've read every single one of his books multiple times, and I've heard it before in his classes. So it's not a stretch for me. So when I'm kind of like running on autopilot and I'm thinking through these problems, whether they're in real life or in force on force kind of stuff, or just in, simulation or skill drills and classes, those things I've, been able to make automatic. And I credit a lot of that with having both the textbook to go along with the education that you get actually from the coursework.
Hey, Brian here again, and we're gonna bring this in another direction as well. So, outside of firearms training, the EvoSec crew, all three of us, along with the other family members and people we're close to, all train and love jiu-jitsu. And I understand you've been getting on the mats lately and starting your own jiu-jitsu journey. Could you explain to us what that means to you and how that's been going for you?
Sure. So probably like a lot of people from our generation, when I was a kid, I took karate classes at the YMCA. They were Goju-Ryu karate classes. I feel like I was in I remember like having loose teeth. So I was probably in the 3rd or 4th grade. At the time, I did that for a while, and I never really felt like it did anything for me. Aside from having a better understanding of what was going on in The Karate Kid, Bloodsport, and any other number of Jean-Claude Van Damme movies. And then when I struck out on my own, I did Taekwondo for a time. Never really got too much out of it aside from like the physical conditioning. And then when I was in dental school, I actually did Japanese jiu-jitsu for about 6 months, but you guys know it's not really anything like Brazilian jiu-jitsu. It's, a lot of striking and footwork type stuff. And then back in October of 2019, I started training Brazilian jiu-jitsu at Artista Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu here in Nashville under Professor Felix Garcia. And my son, who's 13 years old, him and I started doing those classes together in the adult basics and fundamentals classes. And I've just really become enamored with it. And I'm going to be 45 in a couple days, so I'm sort of a late bloomer. But it's been a real experience for me, and it's cool because it's like it's no different than shooting. Like, the further you get down the rabbit hole, like the more and more there is to find out, and you really get an appreciation for how crucial basics and fundamentals are in actual application of this stuff. So I don't know anything about the heel hook stuff. I see some of the upper belt guys doing, a lot of the heel hooking and crazy leg stuff and all these crazy guards. And I'm not there yet. I'm still just trying to work on, I'm 6'4", I weigh 270 pounds. I'm pretty good at guard breaking, and smashing people when I can get there. But, I also spend a pretty good amount of time, getting smashed and in myself. So, it's a great thing. And I really wish I would have done it, earlier in life, of course. I think it's probably what everybody says, but, I'm glad to be doing it now, and I'm really glad to be doing it with, my son, and getting to see him progress and, get better every week as well. So it's been a heck of a good time.
Well, Sherman, I have to admit, when I saw that you started a thorough journey in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I was really pumped, and I think I commented about it. I will tell you that you mentioned your son. My son, Nick Davis, I always mention him every chance I get, Lance Corporal Davis. He's a Marine,
yeah.
And he and I shared jiu-jitsu together over the years. And one of the most proud moments that I ever had was totally unexpected. My son had a hiatus off of jiu-jitsu for quite a while. He wrestled in high school. Of course, that helped him big time. But one afternoon, we had a big promotion. There were some purple belts getting brown, and one guy getting purple belt, and it was a big event at our gym, along with a potluck dinner. It was a blast. But the last person that Professor Will Haggerty called up of Jiu-Jitsu Dynamics, just to give a shout out to our gym, called my son up, and I'm thinking, what's this about, and he starts explaining the transition from childhood jiu-jitsu, which my son was a yellow belt at the time, to the adult side, and he pulls out a blue belt. And, man, I was so pumped. It was an extremely proud moment. So I understand, how what it means to you to have your son. I really love hearing that.
Yeah. It's a weird kind of thing, when you're rolling and sparring with somebody, and you look over and your kid's watching you, and you don't want to get the crap beat out of you in front of your kid, obviously. And you kind of feel the same way, like when you see, your kid rolling with somebody else. You don't, want to see your kid getting trounced. But, he's, he obviously plays a different game than I do, because he's tall and lanky and light. But it's a cool kind of thing, and we compare notes, and we drill on each other and work on stuff, and it's been a real fun thing to do. So we're having a really good time with it.
Well, jiu-jitsu truthfully changes people's lives, and everybody on this show, the Evo Set crew wise, we know that, and I believe we live that. Although it's hard sometimes, I go through periods of time where I'm doing a lot of travel and I'm away from my gym, but still, pressing on as best we can, and that kind of brings me to the next question. I also see that you like to log your training, and man, I believe, in logging and journaling greatly. And I just wanted to know if you believe that journaling, having a notebook for your training, do you believe that is a important part of success in any endeavor?
Oh yeah. I have, a specific, journal, that's actually called, the Jiu-Jitsu Journal, that I write, notes, and an entry after, everything I do, whether it's, a basic class, fundamental class, or an open mat. And I'll talk about my who it was with, and how it is. There's like certain people at your, teammates at your academy that you roll with on a regular basis, and that they're like a higher level of skill than you, but you kind of use your success in rolling with them every week as a barometer of your ongoing success, like, did I beat them to this? Did I like fake them out with, that? And so I record those kinds of things. And then I also make notes about like what I need to research for next time. Like, like probably everybody that's in jiu-jitsu, I watch a ton of YouTube videos and I'll just, type, a couple weeks ago, like I was really trying to get, this elbow escape thing figured out and, how to, get out of side control and get out of mounts. And so I researched a bunch of stuff with that, did privates with my professor, at the academy and, worked through those things to where I could get, a higher percentage of success on those. But I do the same thing, at my office as far as skills and goals, actually enumerating them and having them written down, where they're accessible. I do the same thing with firearms, and my other general training too. I keep, a record of those things in my phone so that they're, backed up electronically and I can access them anywhere, even if I don't have to like walk around with, a whole bunch of composition books and journals to keep all this stuff straight. I've got, an electronic copy of it everywhere I go so that I can, if I'm on a flight, I can reflect about this stuff and think about it. If I'm, commuting, and I commute a lot, I can think about while I'm commuting and just kind of fortify my mind to get it to the point where I'm almost always continuously like, thinking about something. My wife is always like laughing at me about my jiu-jitsu videos and the stuff that I'm like always continuously thinking about. So, and probably like a lot of you guys, I've like accidentally, put her into an arm bar in the night while we've been asleep and stuff like that, just the usual kind of things because my brain is still in drive when it should be in park.
Yeah, that's great. And yes, that has happened to me before in my sleep. My wife's like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah. Yeah, leave me alone.
And yeah, it's most assuredly it's evident when individuals spend as much time as you just enumerated about how much you journal or take notes and all facets of your life. I mean that's definitively a Renaissance approach, and I think that it proves or is part of your success. So that's great. So segueing into kind of our next section, Aaron's gonna turn the pages a little bit here.
Yeah,
Sherman, we're starting to call this the "What's your favorite color?" section of the show.
Yes.
So again, because we want to get some information out there that is not often heard on these types of shows. So completely outside of martial arts and firearms, what is it that you enjoy doing?
Reading. No, I'm just kidding. Of course I read.
Besides reading,
one of my really big passions in life and has been this way since I was a child, because like I said, I was born at a naval air station. My dad's a naval aviator, and once a naval aviator, always a naval aviator. I have a huge love for aviation, both, civilian and military. So, in addition to, air shows and, documentaries and books and all kinds of stuff, I'm just kind of like a aviation nerd. And, if I had my way, I would, go to the Aviation Museum at Wright-Patterson, or the Boeing Museum of Flight in Seattle, or at Payne Field there, and just like bum around all day, or be one of those, what do they call it? A docent, that walks around and is a walking tour guide to tell people about all of this minutia and nerdy fact about aviation and airplanes. And here's a funny thing. So my wife, her dad, is a mechanical engineer, and he actually designed the compressor stage of the engines that were built by Pratt and Whitney that were in the EA-6B Prowler that my dad flew in the Navy. So,
awesome.
Yeah, that was kind of a weird thing. Yeah, so, you don't figure out that kind of stuff just by chance. You have to kind of go out and grab that stuff. So, yeah, if you look at my Instagram account, it's pretty much nothing except for airplanes, jiu-jitsu, and training and gun stuff. So that's what I do. I spend a lot of time fiddling around with airplanes, and I would love to get to the point where once I'm a little bit further down the road in my career path and maybe not working as much, that I actually have my own airplane that I could fly around for fun and to shuttle my wife around for her business, which is she, along with her sister, owns yoga studios. So she's in the yoga studio business, and that's what she does. She's an attorney as well, but that's what she does now. And so, yeah.
You guys are some type A personalities there.
Yeah. We don't let too much stuff around here. So,
well, real quick on the aviation note now, I'll keep it a little generic, but I'm an accountant for an aerospace company, and we have a military contract for, let's just say, one of the coolest planes being put together right now. And literally today I've been doing some accounting on that program. So I get to see a lot of cool stuff on that program. And, I got to keep my ITAR training up to date and all that stuff because of that. But yeah, it's neat. Oh, yeah. That's cool that you like aviation.
Yeah. It's funny. I was actually at a Gabe White class, and I'm sure you guys know who he is, a few months back. And, there was a bunch of people there that are talking about, guns this and guns that and RMRs and all this kind of stuff. And I asked this guy, like, what do you do? And it turns out he worked for, well, I probably shouldn't say who he worked for. I mean, he worked for one of the contractors, one of the big defense contractors at an installation, near in Tennessee. And so I was asking him all these questions, and we started talking about Skunk Works and Lockheed and all kinds of stuff. And everybody was looking at us like, what are these guys talking about? And I could talk about that stuff all day long. I think it's just amazing. I find that's kind of like one of my regrets in life, is that I never flew airplanes for the military, even if it was for just, a short amount of time. But I really I would have gotten a kick out of doing that.
Well, there's way more to life than shooting and learning how to be harder to kill. I mean, we love that stuff too. I mean, or else we wouldn't be doing this. Yeah. But we've all got to get away from it and enjoy and learn about other endeavors too.
Oh, yeah.
Now, speaking of, I'm a musician. Our audience knows, and that's my wheelhouse. I've been playing music for about 30 years, and I just love music. So here's the next question. Now, what are your top 3 bands and or artists? Anything goes. The weirder the better, but just let us know what you did.
Okay. I thought about this long and hard, and it's tough, but this is how I attacked this problem. Okay. So, I would say, chronologically, I'm going to go first with the Traveling Wilburys.
Okay.
And as you guys know, that's a super group made up of Roy Orbison, George Harrison, Tom Petty, Jeff Lynne, Bob Dylan, and sometimes Ringo Starr. And each one of those people in their own is like a universe of different music and sound. And in combination, I always thought that was like my favorite super group. And then, growing up in the Seattle area in the 90s, as a child of the grunge generation, my favorite out of all of those guys was always Chris Cornell, and another, super group thing where, of course, everybody knows Soundgarden, but, Temple of the Dog and then Audio Slave. And then his solo work, I think, was phenomenal too. And he was, I can say there's been two people in the past 5 years that, like, when they announced on the news that they died, I actually called in sick to work. One was David Bowie, and the other one was Chris Cornell, where I was just like, yeah, I can't. I just drove around in my truck all day and just listened to music. I didn't go to work. So, that's too.
Clearly, you're a pretty heavy music fan. It sounds like. That's awesome.
Oh yeah, and then I tried to come up with a third one, but I had to come up with a three-way tie, and it's a weird three-way tie. So it is Sublime, Operation Ivy, and Creedence Clearwater Revival.
That's a serious combination. Yeah, I love it. I love it that you broke the rules a little bit. That's awesome.
Well, I've been accused of being an outside the box thinker once or twice.
Well, that's great, and I'll tell you that those are some great choices. I can't forgive me. What was the biggest Traveling Wilbury song that they did? I had to play it at some function not too long ago.
Well, there was the ones that I think they released for radio play were Handle with Care, and let's see, the other big one was End of the Line.
Okay, yeah, and sorry, I should know it, but I play so much music, I load it into short-term memory. And usually forget it a couple days later.
Yeah. Well, I actually play saxophone, and I played saxophone since sixth grade, and I played it all the way through high school. And I was kind of a band nerd. I played first chair, alto saxophone in the wind ensemble. I played the alto saxophone in the marching band. I played it in jazz band, and I played it in the pep band, that would play at football and basketball games. So I played music a lot. And so I've always, and like growing up, there was always an emphasis, from my parents to be musically inclined. Everybody, like my mom played the accordion. My dad played the trumpet, the trombone, the baritone, and the tuba. Two of my brothers played drums, and my sister played saxophone as well. So we had sometimes at the holidays they'd make us all play music together. So it was,
Okay, so this stuff is golden. This is exactly what we're after here.
Yeah.
So I mean, I bet a lot of people don't know that deep music background that you have, and it's funny. One of my main gigs still today is I've done it for about 18 years. I play in a college pep band, and we're known as one of the best pep bands in the country. Yeah. And a lot of it is because of my loud guitar.
Yeah.
because you don't hear loud guitar at basketball games that often, so it's a lot of fun. And we play everything from Aretha Franklin to Rage Against the Machine.
That's awesome.
It's pretty cool. It's a good band. I wouldn't do it for 18 years if I didn't love it. So,
man,
that's all golden stuff. And I'll say too, I used to play saxophone, so I can relate there too. That's awesome. Appreciate you delving into that stuff.
Yeah, glad to. Thanks, man.
Well, hey, Sherman, Brian here again. It's man, we're really rolling up some time here, and I love it. It's great. It's been an awesome conversation. I really appreciate what you've been sharing with us, but I think we're gonna start wrapping down and letting you get back to your stuff. But do you have any upcoming events or stuff on the calendar that you want to share with our audience right now?
Sure, I have. Let's see, March 1st. In Murfreesboro, Tennessee at On Target Shooting Range. That's going to be a 4-hour hemorrhage arrest course from 8 a.m. to noon on a Sunday morning, which is a real good time slot to knock it out. And then at the end of March 27th, 28th, and 29th, I'll be teaching at Tom Givens' Rangemaster Tactical Conference in Dallas. And I've got a few other courses that I'm hammering out dates on. There's going to be 2 in Georgia, one down in the Athens neck of the woods, and then another one in actually is going to be hosted by Sylvester Jiu-Jitsu Academy. So that'll be cool. And that'll also be sometime in the spring. So those are the ones I've got coming up for sure. And depending on the interest, because I'm getting more and more people that are wanting to do it, I'll probably start offering the 4-hour course at my family's yoga studio here in Nashville as well. We have a classroom there, so it'd be nice to be able to have people actually in Metro Nashville, have easy accessibility to a hack course. So I'm going to start doing that as well.
Nice. Good stuff. So where would we send people to find you? What's your best contact point?
Sure. It's they can find me at civiliandefender.com. And if they need to email me, it's Dr. House, like DrHouse, at civiliandefender.com.
Nice. So anything that you feel we didn't cover that you want to leave us with in a parting note?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground. I really appreciate you guys having me on, and I really enjoy your podcast. And one of the things that I guess is just kind of a pet peeve of mine is I'm really to the point where guns and gear talk and stuff on podcasts and defensive radio is just so overhashed and overplayed. It's just boring. And I love to hear about the application and philosophy behind what people are doing so much more. And I really have gotten a kick out of listening to your discussions on that. And the things that you guys have done with, Professor Cecil Birch and with Craig Douglas and stuff has just been great. And I really like your guys' take on it. And it's nice to hear about the more human aspects of the stuff that we do. And I think that's a really a good descriptor that you guys are bringing to the game that is not often thought of.
Awesome.
It's so easy to think that, like anything, you think that people that are professional football players, all they do is play professional football. People that are professional jiu-jitsu players, all they do is play jiu-jitsu, and people that are professional firearms or martial arts instructors, that's all they do. And it's a lot of what they do, but it's not all of what they do, and I always get a kick out of that. When I was a kid, there was a really great movie that was inspiring to me, called The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai. And when I was a kid, I was like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a scientist and a pilot and a surgeon and a martial artist and, a musician and do all this kind of stuff. And nobody ever bothered to tell me that like that was a difficult path.
Yet here you are. Yet.
That's right.
Awesome.
So any kids that are listening that think that it's not possible to be a multi-disciplinary polymath, it's not true. You can absolutely do it. It just takes a lot of work and a lot of student loans.
Yeah. Good times. All right. Well, hey, I think we'll go ahead and put a wrap on that. So, Eric and Aaron, you guys got anything to add?
Yeah, just saying this has been a real pleasure. You seem to be a really cool dude, Sherman, and I look forward to, I'm going to force these guys to allow me to host you here in Oklahoma, so they have to come down here and hang out with us.
Cool.
So
I like it.
We'll make that happen soon.
I was going to say, I like Oklahoma. You guys have Brahms. It's like Dairy Queen if it was really good.
Oh, man. The same thing that Cecil said. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And Chuck Haggard, I believe, said that recently as well. So what I'll say, Sherman, is thanks a lot for the support and your kind words about the podcast and format, because we are kind of doing what we like to hear. Of course, sometimes it's not the best business model. But we assuredly, we want to bring out the human elements, and we also kind of see sometimes we like gear, but bottom line is there's a lot more important things than gear, way more important than gear. And so thanks a lot. We're hoping that folks notice that, because that's our intent, is to bring conversations like that. So thank you so much for coming on the show. And I hope it's just the first, because we can simply choose topics and we'll just go into detail into singular topics if you'd like next time.
Sounds great. I'm never at a loss for words.
Right on. Right on. All right. Well, we'll put a pin in it until next time, man. Thanks for coming out. Have a good night.
Thanks for having me. You too.
Well, all right now, guys. It's time for accountability this week. Now, I'm going to go ahead and start this out. Last week, I'm excited to say that I was actually able to hit 2 jiu-jitsu sessions. It's been real tough making that many times in a week with my schedule, but again, just real glad about that. Things are slowing down just a bit, so I'm going to be able to hit my jiu-jitsu a lot harder now. And for some other activity, I went and played some basketball with my 14-year-old son, who, I'll tell you what, has gotten really into basketball, and I'm blown away with the way that guy can handle the ball. But we had a nice time, got a sweat on, and were able to have some fun together, shooting some hoops. Now, also, my family this weekend, we were able to go on a hike. There's a nice hiking trail a couple of miles away from our house. Had a lot of fun. Now, one of my boys did get mud on his shoes, so he was kind of upset about that. But so we had to deal with that, kind of a typical family thing on an outing. But all in the end, we had a good time. So now on to our drill of the week. Oh, I don't want to forget to mention that, of course, my commitment to do daily dry fire. I did miss a couple of times this week. I'm going to make sure that I ramp that back up and get that in every day. And I'll report back to you guys just in case I miss any more days. Now, for the drill of the week, that was the drill that Eric prescribed, which was a sidestepping drill at 5 yards on one IDPA target. I went ahead and gave myself a little bit of a challenge. I'm kind of riffing off of what Brian did a few weeks ago, and he shot his with his smaller carry gun and did a great job. I wanted to see if I could get some similar results. So I went ahead and on all 4 strings on the first time around, I had a raw score of 12.8. And I had two shots down, so that was a total of 1480. My second time, that was actually my best score. Raw score was 1186 and just 1 point down, so 1286 total. Now the third one was my best raw score at 1179 for all 4 strings, but I actually had 3 points down, totaling 14.79. Now, in that same range session, I made sure that I worked a bit on my strong hand only and support hand only. That's something I really need to dial in, of course, because that can really tank your scores in a competition. So, well, I guess that's it for me. Hey, how about you, Brian?
Hey, Aaron, thanks. Great to hear that work again, man. I've not to steal any of Eric's thunder, but we were conversing earlier this week, and he shared with me that we've gotten some feedback that people really enjoy this part of the show, and it just lights me up to hear that, because I hope, and the intent of this is to get other people encouraged to become active and to do more in their training and that part of their path. But hey, for this week, I got a couple of dry fire sessions in, still using my laser trainer, and that's been great because it's kind of fun to use. And if somebody stops by, we'll pull it out and play with it. So that's been great. Got my 2 CrossFits and my 2 barbells. Got actually 3 jiu-jitsu classes in this week. I was shooting for 4, but I cranked my neck a little on Wednesday, so I had to bail out of Thursday class. But feeling better now, so that's good. And also, got the drill shot this last weekend, and had my friend Shannon with me, and it was cool because we were really pushing each other when we were doing it. And of course, it may have gotten a little competitive, but true to form, and I'm really happy to say this, and I'm kind of seeing a pattern develop here in me. My first string, which was cold shots, I had not done any warm-up or any other drills. My first string was my best string, and this was that sidestep drill, and that was 10.44 seconds. And, I usually shoot it 3 times that I track, and the subsequent 2 rounds, I actually pushed myself too hard and dropped shots. And, I find myself doing that, and it's showing me that I need to slow down because I really need to make those hits count, because no matter how fast I can empty the magazine, if the shots aren't going where I need them to go, it just doesn't matter, because you can never outshoot accuracy. So that's what I'm going to work on, is accuracy. And one of the other things that I've been working on this week, little ham radio, which I'm sure we'll have a discussion about it sometime, because Eric is also a fellow licensed operator. And one of the things I did was actually get my station set up in my temporary location, where I've got an antenna outside and a cord coming through the wall instead of opening the door when I wanted to hook my radio up. So just another thing that I mess around with and I keep current with. So anyhow, that's pretty much all I'm going to share for the week. Really feel like I'm getting somewhere in jiu-jitsu, though. I really feel like things are starting to make sense, and of course that'll all change and I'll get crushed again, but at the moment I feel like I'm getting somewhere. So anyhow, I'm going to hand this off to you, Eric. What do you got this week?
Thanks a lot, guys. That's getting after it this week. So my accountability this week, I'll go ahead and start with my reading. I've been taking the online Hillsdale College course, Great Books 102, and I had some readings from the novel Don Quixote. I also am still reading a couple of novels for fun. And I just thought I'd add this. I don't normally listen to audiobooks. I just don't get as much out of it as reading a tangible book. But I've been listening to Tom Clancy's Without Remorse because I've read that book before, and I figured it'd kind of be fun just to listen to that on my off time, and that's been awesome to listen to again. I had 2 jiu-jitsu classes this week, and I had a great time also studying on my own X-Guard, which is something I'm really trying to get better at, because I think it's something that can push my game to a higher level. I was able to pull off 2 new X-Guard sweeps during sparring, so that was kind of cool. I also woke before the enemy 4 times this week for some early workouts. strength and conditioning with kettlebells, some barbell movements, assault bike, so on and so forth for Metcon. I'm also continuing to rehab my back through some various exercises that my doctors have prescribed. I'm feeling better and better every day, and I think that essentially I'm able to train as normal, just choosing partners wisely. So essentially that's my accountability of the week. So let's go ahead and move on to the drill of the week. This drill is from the pistol-training.com from the late Todd Green. The drill is the 4-5-6-7 drill designed by Chris Edwards and Todd Green. The range is 7 yards. The target is a 6-inch circle. There's going to be a PDF version in the show notes. The start position varies. Rounds fired is 20. The 4-5-6-7 drill was inspired by Gila Hayes' 5x4 drill and the various iterations thereof. A shot timer is used to begin each string. The strings are as such. 1. Draw and fire 5 rounds from concealment, two-handed. Second string, draw and fire 5 rounds from concealment, strong hand only. 3. From the ready position, fire 5 rounds, weak hand only. 4. Draw and fire 5 rounds from concealment, two-handed, which is a repeat of string 1. For any shots outside of the 6-inch circle, add 1 second to your time. The total times and penalties for all 4 strings determine your overall score. A basic rating is 22 seconds or under. Intermediate is 18 seconds, and advanced is 13 seconds. This drill is also compatible with the QPT target using the inner wide outline center of mass circle. So let's get out there and shoot that drill, and we'll have some accountability on it. So with that said, I think we're going to go ahead and close out the evening. Until next time, stay safe out there.